Good afternoon. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. This is a regular meeting. It is Wednesday, March 15th, 2023. It is 2:04 p.m. This session is set to go until 2:30 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. To my right is Vice Chair Ty Menser. Commissioner Edwards might be joining us via Zoom. If not, he is excused for this meeting. Also in the boardroom, we have County Manager Ramiro Chavez and Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell. And today, Rebecca Harvey, our Climate Mitigation Senior Program Manager, is here to discuss infrastructure for electric vehicle charging stations briefing. And so,
just an opening statement, Madam Chair. This is just a continuation of the larger objective the board has, as well as the county, as to how we can start building infrastructure for electric vehicles. And as we know, that's part of our future, and I believe the county needs to take the right steps to start be part of that future and building the infrastructure. What you will be hearing today is a potential grant opportunities that we might be seeing in a specific site we might be considering, but also the larger conversation related to a policy related to how we're going to be managing the operations and maintenance, and whether those charging stations will be only solely for the public or combined to county employees or whatever in between. And that policy conversation needs to occur down the road, but sooner rather than later. I believe you already had some of initial conversations related to that among yourselves. But again, this is the first step. And here you go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. I will share my screen. I am Rebecca Harvey. I'm the Mitigation Senior Program Manager. And today, as Ramiro said, we are talking about electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and this topic and this initiative is a collaboration among the Central Services Fleet and Facilities Divisions with the Board of County Commissioners Climate Mitigation Program. So we have Jason, Ash, and Bruce Rohrbach on the Zoom who will be participating in the discussion as well. So our goals for this afternoon are to request board direction for to move forward with three somewhat separate but related actions. The first one is to submit the Phase 2 application for Commerce ETS grant, Electrification of Transportation Systems, and I will be telling you more about that grant in a moment. Second is more broadly to develop a county policy for the provision of EV charging for employees and or members of the public. And then related to that is to also continue to seek federal, state, and private funding opportunities as they arise. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll talk about workplace and public EV charging together, but we can separate them later in the discussion. There's some separate issues, but as far as the benefits, the benefits are similar. Deploying infrastructure for EV charging is a visible way to demonstrate the county's commitment to sustainability. It will help to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions measurably and advance our climate goals. And having them out there is visible. So it raises awareness for the public and helps to reduce barriers to EV ownership, such as range anxiety that people may have. And then importantly, the last bullet, to increase the access to owning electric vehicles to people who may not be able to charge them at home. A lot of us can charge our vehicles at home, but people who live in multifamily housing don't have that opportunity. So that's, we don't always think of that, but that's a real tangible benefit of having more public chargers. In the latest 2021 greenhouse gas inventory for Thurston County, transportation accounted for 36% of the county's emissions. And as the state is moving toward cleaner electricity, vehicles powered by gas and diesel will become the greatest source of local emissions at some point in the future. So increasing adoption of electric vehicles is one of the easiest shifts we can make to measurably bring down our county's greenhouse gas emissions. Under strategy T3 in the climate mitigation plan, there are 6 actions. I just listed them here just for the purpose of showing those bars on the right, which indicate that greenhouse gas impact, that all of these actions under increasing adoption of EVs have been prioritized as having high GHG reduction. I'm gonna turn it to Bruce Rohrbaugh now to talk through some of what the county has already done and has on the drawing board.
Afternoon, I'm Bruce Rohrbaugh, Fleet Services Manager. Currently working with facilities on adding additional infrastructure for county vehicle use. The current EV county fleet is 2 hatchbacks and 1 truck that's picked on the slide. And additionally, there are 2 plug-in hybrids. So they have the ability to charge at a charging station and then drive on battery only. When the battery is depleted, they switch over to an onboard gas engine. There are 2 more electric vehicles on order. And speaking with vehicle manufacturer representatives, I expect to have ordering available for compact all-electric SUVs later this year. So planning to purchase an electric compact SUV this year and put it in the pool fleet to help with operator adoption and assessment for county needs. Next slide, please. So the county has had public charging stations. From 11 to 18, there were charging stations at 3 sites, the ECC, Public Works, and the courthouse. We experienced these charging stations were on a commercial network, so they were visible to the public. They had a charging rate that was set at 50 cents an hour with a 75-cent minimum. And we experienced very low utilization at the ECC and Public Works. Those sites are not available outside of normal business hours, and there isn't a lot of traffic to those sites. We did experience limited use at the courthouse. In 19, when we upgraded the charging stations to dual port, what that provided was a dedicated charging port for public and employee use, and the use tripled. In the first quarter of 2020, just prior to COVID shutdowns. And since then, the public use has been very low at the courthouse. Unless there are any questions, I'll pass it back to Rebecca.
So I know that there's some types of fleet vehicles that aren't quite right for electric vehicle at this point. That's changing, we know, but I guess is the same thing true of hybrids? And I don't mean the plug-in hybrid, I mean the flipping hybrid. Because one of the I'll just show my cards. Like one of the things I've been really surprised about is why there hasn't been a more aggressive, like a regular hybrid, like a Toyota Prius type thing. It cuts your gas use by like 50%, and there's zero consequence. Like you don't have to plug anything in, you don't have to install any chargers, you don't have any range anxiety, they're not more, they're not more expensive. I mean, it's like while we struggle with the EV infrastructure to completely electrify all the cars across the nation, it's been shocking to me that governments haven't taken more aggressive stance to just stop allowing the production of anything but a hybrid. If I'm making sense, because that would right there have a massive impact with zero impact. I mean, on consumers and on infrastructure and all these other things that are so hard about completely electrifying. So I'm just wondering, in our fleet, like the intercity transit has done that, taken that route. They bought hybrid electric buses because it's easier to just do it and it's done and you're making an impact. Is there thought at the county of, okay, we're not ready to go fully electric, but can we stop buying gas vehicles? Are there hybrid options for some of the vehicles where there aren't electric options yet? I guess that's my question. Because I would highly encourage that as just an easy way to make a big impact.
I can follow up with an exact breakdown of numbers, but as a high-level overview, the county's sedan fleet is, I think, entirely hybrid,
Okay.
unless we have one or two older ones, and with the exception of law enforcement. As far as the compact SUVs, the major manufacturer that did produce hybrid SUVs discontinued that until about to the 2019 model year. So there was a 4 or 5 year gap. And then since then, with the greater availability of hybrids for compact SUVs, Thurston County has been prioritizing their purchase. They make.
Already heading that direction.
Right. So Bruce, perhaps as a follow-up to this meeting, we can provide the board with the plan for converting the fleet where we can.
Yes.
When we're talking about our electrification, I think it's worth including, if the whole sedan fleet is hybrid, I think we need to be telling that story, and commissioners need to know that, and the public needs to hear that, because that's important as well. You know, that for when we need to use a vehicle, it's either the plug-in hybrid or it's a gas Explorer. I know that, so I mean, I didn't know that we had a lot of hybrid sedans, but I think that's part of this picture.
That's good. I agree. And Bruce has also shared with me just numbers of, or percentages of fleet downsizing that he's done a lot of work to identify vehicles that are not necessary or that can be shared, and there's a lot of savings in just, you know, reducing the numbers of vehicles as well, so.
Because the mileage was not there and the usage.
That's right.
Yeah.
The usage just wasn't there.
Can I ask a follow-up in terms of, you know, these changes either to hybrid or electric are happening right as, gosh, I forgot the, but basically as they're phasing out and we're going back to the market. So they are in, it's not savings, it's not ERP, I don't know why I have that.
ER&R.
ER&R, there we go.
Right. We're as the cycle goes, when it's time to replace a piece of equipment, that's one of the things that Bruce does, is look at what options there are and has that conversation with the office or department that owns or uses that vehicle. So that's just part of our general practice.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to return to the greenhouse gas benefits for just a moment, because I think this data from US Department of Energy is compelling, because it shows that driving an electric vehicle in Washington is even significantly better for the environment than it is elsewhere in the country, because Washington's electricity comes largely from renewable sources, like is shown in the pie graph here, hydropower and wind, et cetera. In an EV in Washington produces an estimated 940 pounds annually of emissions, compared to almost 4,000 pounds for an EV as a nationwide average, and compared to over 11,000 pounds for a gasoline vehicle. And these numbers can be found on afdc.energy.gov, and they actually have more updated numbers that show that gap getting even wider. So the transition to EVs is happening, as we see around us, right? We see more on the road every day, and the data support that, and it's actually happening faster than they anticipated even a couple of years ago. So this, the sales of EVs doubled in 2022, and it's now predicted that battery electric vehicles will be the most popular type of light vehicle sold globally as early as 2028. And this graph on the left, the very top bar, the dark green, is battery electric vehicles. And so this shows that the percentage of BEVs sold in the US stood at just 3% in 2021, is expected to grow to 19% by 25, 47% by 2030, and 68% by 2035. Washington State has the 4th highest total number of EVs in the nation and 2nd highest per capita. but the state is ranked 10th in the number of EV chargers per capita. So that we think we have a little gap to fill to catch up there. And then when I developed these slides, the data for Thurston County was 4,326 registered BEVs and plug-in hybrids combined. That's gone up. This site has up-to-date data too. So the market growth is stimulated in part by the goals and policies that have been set at both the federal and state levels. The targets are listed here, and in addition to these explicit targets for sales of zero-emission vehicles, there are a number of federal and state grants that are coming down. In fact, 2 released just in my inbox in the last week. And so the funding opportunities are there, which is why we brought this to you today. They're coming at us, and we want to see if we can take advantage of some of them. And I also wanted to mention that there is a state statute, RCW 4301.250, which explicitly authorizes the purchase of electricity at state expense to charge private and public vehicles at state office locations.
That helps to address the issue of gift of public funds.
So because of the competition among manufacturers, the government incentives, and falling raw material prices, new EVs are anticipated to reach price parity with gas vehicles this year in 2023. And this is talking about the mass market models, not just the luxury models. Some of them have already reached price parity in their class. And in addition to new EVs, the used EV market has tripled in size in the last 18 months. You may recall prices of used electric vehicles were very high last summer. I think they spiked, they peaked in July, but they're coming down a lot now. And there's a site called recurrentauto.com, which tracks the used EV market and lists, for example, as I've shown here, a number of models that are available for less than $15,000. They also have a list less than $25,000. So the point being that EVs are becoming more affordable for more people in middle and lower income classes. I wanted to give a quick review. You probably know some of this already, but just a quick review of the types of EV charging stations. Level 1 is a standard 120 volt outlet called a trickle charge, which adds about 5 miles of range per hour of charging. So it's used primarily in residential settings for overnight charging. Level 2 uses a 240 volt outlet and adds 20 to 60 miles per hour of charging. Level 2 stations range in price from around $2,000. Bruce can pipe in on that, but I think, you know, if you get a basic non-networked station, they're $1,500, $2,000, something like that. And then up to as much as $16,000 or so for the networked dual plug charging stations. And then the costs of the electrical wiring can vary based on the site, but is always less for new construction than it is for doing a retrofit of a parking lot. So anytime you have a parking lot that's being torn up for other reasons, that's a great opportunity to do your EV readiness. And then direct current fast chargers or DC fast chargers, also called level 3 stations, add 60 to 100 miles for every 20 minutes of charging. So they cost more, they cost a range of $45,000 to $75,000 a piece. The electrical upgrades to support the 480 volt transformer that's needed can add to that cost. Feel free to ask questions as I go. I just have a few more slides and then we'll open up. Is there anything so far at this point?
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes, I'd just like to know on the 3 levels of chargers and how quick it recharges the battery. Does it have a detrimental effect the quicker you charge the battery versus, you know, the slower charge, and hence the battery might need to be replaced sooner?
I believe that is still the case. It was a couple of years ago when I bought my own car. So unless the technology has changed substantially, and I can look into that, I believe that if you're using fast chargers all the time, that yes, it will, it'll deplete your battery faster. So it's not recommended to only use fast chargers. You use the slower ones, you know, at home or overnight.
And then how about used vehicles? You made mention of the used vehicles. Are the batteries then going to be in need of replacement because it's 6 or 7 years old? Or how long do they last, and what kind of cost is there to replace the batteries?
Yeah, that's a great question. I showed that as an example. It's really, you know, the used older EVs are not necessarily for everyone if you have long distance commutes, but I'll just use myself as an example. I bought a 2016 Nissan Leaf. We're a 2-car family, so we have a longer range vehicle for the long trips, but that car cost me $10,500 and I paid it off, you know, much quicker than I would a new car. So, and it's a fantastic commuting car. And it gets up to about 100 miles. Well, now it's less, but Nissan at least warranties the battery for 8 years, 100,000 miles. I could look into the other manufacturers, but I hope that they would have something similar. So I actually have a request in with Nissan right now for my new battery. It's taking a few months to arrive, but once it does, then I'll be up to about 120 miles. Now I'm down to like 70 to 80. Still a fantastic commuting car though, so it just depends on what you're using the car for.
Okay, nope, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so I did, as an example, I calculated the electricity costs for a dual port level 2 charging station if it were used for 8 hours a day. And that would be around $4,200 in electricity costs in a year. So say we scaled that up and put in 10 of those chargers, 20 charge points or ports, $42,000 per year. And just for the sake of argument, you know, there's a lot of factors that lead to the adoption of EVs. But say that each one of those new charge ports that's out there translated to one new EV on the road, then we would be reducing 200,000 pounds of CO2 in that year. So this is just an example to illustrate that investments in the infrastructure are investments in meeting our climate mitigation goals, and we can measure and quantify these benefits. And I wanted to just briefly acknowledge that the infrastructure does bring with it some annual O&M, operations and maintenance costs. Some grants that I'm seeing do cover these costs as well as the infrastructure, and you can do it in prepaid for 5 years or a certain time frame. And there's also the option to lease the space to a private developer that would install and own the equipment. So that's always an ownership option that could be considered. Some of the grants require that the host own them, but some don't. And we can consider if a lease agreement might be a better option in some cases. And so the county did submit a phase 1 grant application for which was basically a letter of interest, just a very general phase 1 application for this commerce grant opportunity called Electrification of Transportation Systems. And its objective is to fill gaps in the infrastructure in rural communities. So our proposal is to subcontract with the Thurston Economic Development Council, who we would basically pass the funds to them to purchase, install, operate, and maintain the DC fast chargers and some level 2 chargers at the Southwest Washington Agricultural Business and Innovation Park in Tenino. Commerce states that they will let applicants know the first week of April whether they're encouraged to submit the full application. If we are encouraged, then the application deadline will be May 15th. So that's our first ask that we'll return to today is for your direction to go ahead and submit that if we're invited to do so. And I'll wrap up now and leave room for discussion. If we do receive direction from the board to move forward, here is a starting list that Bruce, Jason, and I have put together for the work that we will begin to do. Again, collaboration between Central Services and the Climate Mitigation Program. Probably we'll also bring in Public Works in the near future to look at potential sites in parks and other county-owned land that Public Works manages as well. So I'm not gonna dive into all these steps now. It's really next steps that, if given direction, we will start to dig into some of these. And so I'll return to our 3 asks here again and just leave it here for any questions that you have and discussion. Thank you. Should I stop sharing?
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Edwards, do you have any questions, sir?
Yeah. Earlier in your presentation, Rebecca, you talked about, I think we were charging 50 cents an hour to plug in. What does that end up benefiting? Is it a level 1 charger or something else? And what's the real cost? I think it was 50 cents an hour, 75-cent minimum that we were doing.
Yes, Commissioner, I know that's a level 2 charge point, smart network charger, and I'm imagining Bruce might have some more details on.
Bruce, could you speak to that, please?
Yes, so due to the low use, we do not full cost. Whether 50 cents an hour, 75-cent minimum recoups the full cost is heavily dependent on utilization, because we have to recapture both the initial capital cost, which is a fixed cost, as well as the network subscription fees, which are fixed annually, with the electricity use being a variable cost.
And does it sound like we're going to be able to get federal grant money? It seemed like something was in here that looked like we'd be able to get federal grant money to allow this to take place.
So it looks like one of the decision points on here that Rebecca has is continue to seek state, federal, and private funding opportunities for EV charging infrastructure. So that is one of the requests that they have for us today.
So we would seek that money. There's no guarantee that we would get that money.
Yeah.
So the county may, if we move forward with these charging stations, the county may be obligated to pay for the electric.
And that goes back to the item number 2, which is the board needs to engage on that policy.
Yeah.
Right.
And that conversation needs to occur sooner rather than later, because that really is going to give us as a staff the perspective as to how we need to proceed with that. And I think goes along with what Commissioner Edwards has stated in the past, but I think the board needs to provide that policy direction.
Right. A lot of the grants, in fact, most of the grants that we've seen, to be eligible for the grant money, you have to commit to public-facing availability. So what we've been doing so far is, as you know, the charging stations that we've been installing on county property have been only for county vehicles, with the exception of what's at the courthouse right now. But we are asking for the board to approve public-facing charging stations.
Okay, questions, Commissioner Menser, and then I'm going to request a decision because we're over time.
I mean, now that I've driven an electric vehicle for a few months, you know, I don't think you're gonna get much interest or utilization of a commercial for-pay level 2 charger. Most people, because you can't survive just on that. You have to have some setup at home. And so if you have a setup at home, level 2 charging will take care of that. What we need are a lot more fast chargers, because that's the only way you can utilize electric vehicles on long distance things. And if you've looked at the mapping, we don't quite have what we need, anywhere near what we need, you know, across the state. So I'm all for, you know, taking the actions to encourage, but I don't know that putting in for-pay level 2 chargers is really going to have a big impact on encouraging EV.
Can I just respond real quick?
Yeah.
That I agree, we need lots more fast chargers. It depends on the use case and the specific location. And there, one example of a good location for public level 2 chargers would be near multifamily housing, because folks don't have that opportunity to plug in at home, and could use that. If there were enough of them. I mean, you got to work with the developments as well.
We can get a grant to do something like that?
Yeah, some of the grants, I just saw one actually, they prioritize, if you have public land that's near multifamily housing, they're gonna prioritize those locations. Personally, I would recommend making them free if we could. And that's why I showed the electricity costs. They're not very high, and it's an investment in meeting our goals. Some of the grants also require that they be free, I think. Not all of them. But for level 2. And I think as we're seeing, we don't know for sure, but that fee for the level 2 may be a barrier in and of itself. And you might get more utilization and more benefit if they are free.
Yeah, I agree with that. Otherwise, I would not be motivated to spend a lot of county resources on installing for-pay level 2 chargers, because I don't think that's the gap that we're gonna have in our infrastructure.
The proposal done on the Ag Park is level 2 chargers,
No,
correct?
it's fast charge. It's both. We're asking for some of both.
Just to make sure that we cover the cost. Okay.
The employees that are there and longer term visitors, like they have events there, level 2 that could be offered for free, might be better for them. But some fast chargers as well.
Okay, well, let's go to the decision point because it is 2:35. And so first item is submit phase 2 applications for Commerce Electrification of Transportation Systems, ETS grant, if invited for the deadline, and the deadline is on May 15th. And this is the grant for the subcontract with the Thurston Economic Development Council to purchase, install, operate, and maintain the EV chargers.
In Tenino.
In Tenino.
The Ag Park. Yeah.
Are commissioners ready to move forward with that first request? Commissioner Edwards, we'll start with you.
Well, I believe I am. It's always worth asking for more money. Now, whether in total, I think we need more than a half hour. I'd certainly like to hear Commissioner Mentzer's, he's much more knowledgeable about this than I am, for an example. And I don't think a half hour does this topic justice, to be honest with you. But I do think we ought to be exploring any way that we can potentially not burden our local taxpayers if we can burden, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So if we can get money from elsewhere, that's my preference to look into that first. But I think like Bruce, there's quite a maintenance benefit of like fleet operations and stuff. So there's a lot more information I think we can hear on this topic than a half hour.
Okay, so that's a yes for the first
yeah,
item?
The grant.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Yes from Commissioner Mentzer and yes from me, so 3-0. And then for the other 2 items, I will be, maybe if we can schedule another session where we can come back and we can have a more in-depth conversation about that, that county policy, what that would look like, and the second item to continue.
So if I may, and maybe we can start working with Rebecca to bring a draft policy. I mean, at this point, you're not committed to any policy. Yeah. And so we'll bring a potential draft for you to weigh in. And then we'll begin the conversation whether that is a policy you'd like to support or not. But give us the opportunity to bring a proposal, and we'll start having that conversation.
Perfect. Okay.
Chair?
Yes, sir.
What about on continuing to seek state, federal, and private funding? Aren't we interested in continuing in that endeavor?
We will absolutely continue to seek grant opportunities, but part of what we need to know from the board is whether or not you support public-facing charging stations and if they need to charge for them, because that will tell us certain grants we can or can't apply for.
Okay, well that'll help us if we have a longer discussion, I think,
Yeah.
to get there. Thank you.
So that's gonna be our next step. We're gonna have, Rebecca's gonna draft a draft policy along with our county manager, and it's gonna be presented to the board, and we're gonna have a more in-depth discussion, so. Thank you all. It is 2:39 and we are adjourned.